Everyone in town said Daniel was a fool. He fell in love in 3 days, proposed in 3 weeks, and gave up a job offer in Chicago for a woman who hadn't even kissed him yet. They laughed at the bar. They whispered at church. They shook their heads at the gas station. Only fools rush in. They were quoting Elvis without knowing it. But here's the thing nobody tells you about fools. Sometimes, just sometimes, they are the only ones paying close enough attention to recognize something real when it stands right in front of them. This is the story of one of those fools, and of why being called one might be the greatest compliment life ever gave him. Daniel Holt was 34 years old, recently divorced, and absolutely certain he was done with love. Not bitter. He liked to make that distinction to anyone who asked. Bitter meant you still cared. Daniel had moved past caring into something quieter, something he told himself felt like peace, and which his sister quietly called emotional paralysis. He had a studio apartment in Macon, Georgia, a second-hand leather couch he loved more than he'd loved his marriage, and a standing Friday night at Ronnie's bar where he drank 2 beers, watched the game, and drove home alone. He was not looking for anything the night Margaret Souza walked in. She came in from the rain, the kind of southern summer rain that drops without warning and soaks you to the skin in 45 seconds. She was laughing when she pushed through the door, laughing at herself for getting caught without an umbrella, her dark hair plastered against her cheek. She had a canvas bag over her shoulder and a hardcover book pressed against her chest like a shield, already ruined at the corners from the downpour. She looked around the bar with the calm, unhurried eyes of someone who had learned to be comfortable in rooms where she didn't know anyone. Daniel noticed her the way you notice a sudden change in temperature. Not a thunderclap, just a shift. He went back to the game. 12 minutes passed. Then the jukebox, Ronnie's ancient Wurlitzer that nobody ever touched because it only had songs from 1958 to 1965, suddenly started playing. Nobody had put money in it. Later, Ronnie would swear the mechanism just tripped on its own. But what came out of that machine in the middle of a bar in Macon, Georgia, on a rainy Friday in July, was Elvis Presley's voice. Slow and careful and devastating. Wise men say, only fools rush in. Daniel put his beer down, across the bar. Margaret looked up from her book. Their eyes met for exactly 3 seconds, the length of one musical phrase. Then she looked back down. He looked back at the game. But something had shifted in the room, the way furniture shifts after an earthquake, slightly off from where it was, close enough that only the people who lived there would notice. He didn't speak to her that night. He drove home in the rain and sat in his car outside his apartment for 11 minutes, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. He didn't know her name. He didn't know anything about her. But he felt, in a way he had no rational language for, that he had just been shown something. Like a door he had convinced himself was a wall. He told himself it was nothing. He went to bed. He lay awake for 2 hours. He told himself again it was nothing. He almost believed it. He saw her again on Monday at the public library. He wasn't there for her. He genuinely needed to return a book about civil war railroad logistics that he had borrowed 6 weeks ago and never read. She was at a table near the window with 3 stacks of folders and a laptop and the focused expression of someone conducting surgery on a document. She was a grant writer, he would later learn, someone who spent her days building careful arguments for why beautiful, unfunded things deserve to exist in the world. Museums, community gardens, music programs for kids who couldn't afford instruments. He didn't approach her. He returned his book. He checked out another one he had no intention of reading. He sat down 2 tables away and opened it and read the same paragraph 9 times. On his way out, he stopped. His body made the decision, before his mind could veto it. He walked to her table and said quietly, so as not to disturb the library silence, "You were at Ronnie's bar on Friday, when the jukebox played by itself." She looked up. She studied him for a moment with those unhurried eyes. "I was," she said. "I'm Daniel, Margaret." She didn't offer her hand. She didn't smile yet, but she didn't look away either. "Did you think that jukebox was as strange as I did?" "I thought it was the strangest thing that's happened to me in years," he said. Completely honest. More honest than he intended to be. She smiled then, small, careful, like she was trying it out to see how it felt. "Sit down if you want," she said. "I have 40 more minutes of work, and then I'm getting coffee. You can join me if you're not doing anything important." He sat down. He read 0 words of his book. He watched her work, not in a creepy way, in the way you watch someone do something they're genuinely good at, the quiet absorption of competence. And he thought, I am going to fall in love with this woman. Not as a wish, as a recognition. The way you recognize weather. He knew what people would say. His friend Marcus would call it infatuation. His ex-wife's voice in his head said he was doing the same thing he always did, projecting, rushing, building a monument to someone before he knew. If they had feet of clay, maybe all of that was true. But the men who warned other men away from love, the wise men, the careful men, the ones who prided themselves on never getting hurt, Daniel had watched them too. Watched them sit in bars alone at 48, wise and unscathed, and profoundly, secretly hollow. He had been on his way to becoming one of them. He was not entirely sure that was wisdom. He was not entirely sure careful was the same as smart. He went for coffee with Margaret. They talked for 2 hours and 20 minutes. He drove home and didn't need to sit in his car. He went straight inside, straight to bed, and slept better than he had in 2 years. Macon is a small enough city that people notice when a man like Daniel Holt, known for his Friday routine, his leather couch, his polite but persistent emotional unavailability, starts showing up places with a woman nobody knows. They noticed at the coffee shop. They noticed at the farmer's market 2 Saturdays in a row. They definitely noticed when he showed up at the community garden fundraiser where Margaret was presenting, sitting in the back row with his arms crossed and an expression on his face that his sister Sandra later described as a man watching the Super Bowl and trying to pretend he isn't nervous. Sandra pulled him aside after. "How long have you known her?" 3 weeks. Sandra looked at him the way older sisters have looked at younger brothers since the beginning of recorded time. "Daniel, I know. You just got divorced 18 months ago. I know. Sandra. And she just moved here from Portland. She doesn't know anyone. She's probably still figuring out her." "I know all of that," he said. "I'm not proposing to her tomorrow. He stopped, looked across the room to where Margaret was answering a question from an elderly woman with the same focused patience she gave everything. "I feel awake," he said finally. "I haven't felt awake in a long time." Sandra didn't have an answer for that dot, but Marcus did. Marcus was his best friend since college. A methodical man who had married his college girlfriend, bought a house on a spreadsheet, and hadn't made an unplanned decision since 2009. Marcus took Daniel to lunch and delivered what he clearly considered a compassionate intervention. "You're running on dopamine," Marcus said, cutting his sandwich in precise halves. "It's biochemistry, not fate. The jukebox was a coincidence. The library was a coincidence. You're pattern matching because your brain wants to believe in something after the divorce." "Maybe you're right," Daniel said. "But I'd rather be wrong about something beautiful than right about something empty." Marcus had no answer for that either. The town kept watching. The town kept whispering. A divorced man rushing into something with a woman he'd known 3 weeks. Only fools, they said. Only fools. They said it with pity. They said it with a kind of satisfaction, the satisfaction of the careful, the protected, the ones who had never risked anything large enough to lose. Daniel heard them. He didn't argue. He just kept showing up. To coffee, to the library, to conversations that lasted until the places closed around them. He kept paying attention. He kept being awake. Margaret Souza had her own history of caution. She had been careful for years, deliberately, architecturally careful, the way someone is careful after something has genuinely broken. In Portland, she had dated a man for 4 years, a kind man, a reasonable man, a man who loved her in a measured, proportional way that she had told herself was mature. They had broken up not because anything went wrong, but because nothing went right enough. They were comfortable. Comfort, she had decided, was the thing love wore when it was too tired to be love anymore. She had moved to Macon for a contract job and told herself she wasn't running away. She was redirecting. She was being strategic. And then a jukebox played by itself, and a man across a bar put down his beer and looked at her like she was a weather event. She didn't trust it. She was honest with herself about that. She wrote it in her journal the morning after the library coffee. He looks at me like I'm more interesting than I probably am, and I am dangerously susceptible to that right now. She had coffee with him again the next week, and the week after, and told herself each time it was just friendship, just human contact in a new city. She was being strategic, but Daniel Holt did something that the reasonable, measured men in her life had never done. He listened to her the way people listen to music they love, not waiting for his turn to speak, not filing her words away for later reference in an argument, actually listening, following the thread of what she said into the places she hadn't quite finished saying yet, asking questions that showed he'd heard not just the words, but the space around them. One evening in week 5, sitting on the steps of the library after it closed, she was talking about a grant she'd almost gotten for a music education program in a school district that had cut its arts budget to 0. She hadn't gotten it. The kids hadn't gotten their instruments. She still thought about it. What would you do if you could fund it yourself? Daniel asked. She laughed. I'm a grant writer, Daniel. I know. But if you could, what would you do first? She told him, in more detail than she'd told anyone. And when she was done, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, You should write the proposal anyway, even if you don't have a funder yet. Write it like it's already happening. Sometimes the document makes the thing real enough that the money finds it. It was not a revolutionary piece of advice, but it was exactly right, and nobody had said it to her before. And she went home that night and opened her laptop and started writing. At midnight, she stopped and looked at what she'd built and thought, I am going to fall in love with this man, not as a wish, as a recognition. It was 3 months after the jukebox when Daniel did the thing that made the whole town certain he had lost his mind. He turned down the Chicago job. It was a real job, a senior project management role at a logistics firm, a 30% salary increase, the kind of opportunity that appears once in a decade. His boss had recommended him. His old college mentor had made calls. Everyone agreed it was the obvious move. Daniel had been planning to take it before the Friday in July, when the rain came and the jukebox played, and a woman with a ruined book walked through her door. He didn't tell Margaret he was considering it, which is important. He didn't turn it down for her. He turned it down because when he sat with the offer letter in his apartment and tried to imagine Chicago, what he felt was not excitement, but absence. The absence of the library steps. The absence of the farmer's market. The absence of a woman who wrote grants for beautiful unfunded things and listened to him back. Really listened, the way he listened to her. He called his mentor and said no. His mentor was baffled. Marcus was baffled. Sandra was baffled, then quiet, and said, "Is this about Margaret?" And he said, "It's about who I am when I'm in this city. She's part of that, but it's bigger than her. I know who I want to be here." Sandra was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Okay, just okay." Like she was putting something down she'd been holding for a while. The town, of course, heard about the Chicago job, and they revised their verdict. Not just a fool, but a catastrophic fool. A man who had sacrificed a career for a woman he'd known 3 months. Hopeless, reckless, rushing got what they didn't see, what the careful people never see. Because they're not paying that kind of attention, was the conversation Daniel had with Margaret 2 weeks later. She had gotten the grant. The music program grant she'd written at midnight. The one that didn't have a funder yet. The document she'd made real, because Daniel told her to make it real. A foundation in Atlanta had found it through a mutual contact, read it, and funded it in full. 47 kids in a school district that had given up on music would have instruments by September. She told him over dinner. He watched her face when she said it, the way someone looks when a thing they believed in, despite all the evidence, finally arrives. He thought about the jukebox. He thought about 3 seconds of eye contact in a bar. He thought about how many times in the last 3 months he had been told he was moving too fast, feeling too much, caring about the wrong things at the wrong speed. He reached across the table and took her hand. "Can I tell you something?" He said. "Yes," she said. "I think the wise men were wrong." She looked at him, those unhurried eyes, the ones that had never needed to rush, because they always saw clearly. "I know," she said. "I think they've been wrong for a long time. We were just the first ones to say it out loud." Outside Ronnie's bar, they had gone back on purpose to that same bar. The jukebox was playing again. Same song, same voice. Slow and careful and devastating. Nobody had put money in it. Ronnie would later swear it just played on its own again. Some things are like that. Daniel Holt was never not a fool. He was just a fool who understood something the wise men had missed. That caution is not the same as wisdom. That speed is not the same as recklessness. And that knowing something is real does not require it to be slow. He and Margaret got engaged 8 months after the jukebox played by itself in a bar in Macon, Georgia. The town talked about it, of course. Some of them called it impulsive. Some of them, the ones who looked closely enough, called it inevitable. A few of the wiser ones, the ones who had started paying a different kind of attention, said nothing at all. Just smiled. The way you smile when you hear a song you've loved your whole life and finally understand what it was always trying to tell you. Take my hand, take my whole life too, for I can't help falling in love with you. Were they fools, or were they the only ones brave enough to be honest? Have you ever felt something real and been told it was too fast? Have you ever been Daniel, or been the town? Drop your story in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. The king deserves a real conversation.